Oh, I love you. But now, I must destroy you.
Nothing like digging into a fresh slice of DLC. Anyways, welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another really interesting Spider-Man PS4 related video. And in this video, we are going to fully go over all of the City That Never Sleeps DLC for Marvel's Spider-Man, and I'm going to rank them in order from worst to best. And alongside of that, I'm also going to go over some certain possibilities that I do believe Insomniac could have taken aspects from within the base game and have them implement it within the DLC, but we will get into that a bit later. And in the meantime, if you do want to hear another Spidey Squad community member's thoughts on Spider-Man PS4's DLC, I do recommend checking out Salvage's recent video saying why he thinks the DLC for Spider-Man PS4 is a decent mess. But before we begin, I do think it's important to discuss the main purpose of why Insomniac created this DLC in the first place and what they were trying to accomplish with releasing it after the main game released all the way back in September. And with that in mind, I'll hand it over to the main man himself, Brian Intihar.
So obviously when you get this bundle, you're gonna get a copy of the game. But what I'm really excited about is that you also get the 3 pieces of DLC that are part of the City Never Sleeps initiative. Each of these DLC packs come with a new villain, a new storyline, new mission, and yes, a bunch of new suits.
So yes, just like Brian said, after the main game of Spider-Man PS4 released back in September, Insomniac and Marvel were planning to expand the game's story with releasing 3 separate chapters of DLC for the game called The City That Never Sleeps. And within each of these pieces of DLC, they were to include new characters within the Spider-Man PS4 universe, as well as new missions to play through, new environments to explore, new enemies to fight, new suits to wear, and of course, all of our favorite screwball challenges. Yay!
You are everything I wanted to be!
Now that is a photobomb!
You just threw it away!
So throughout October, November, and December, each of these chapters for The City That Never Sleeps did release on a monthly basis and were priced at an equal amount for each individual chapter. Meaning that if you bought one chapter separately, it would add up to a cost of $10, and if you bought all of them individually at the same time, they would add up to a total of $30. But if you did decide to buy the season pass ahead of time, the entirety of the DLC would have only cost you a total of $25. So with all of those features in mind, there's also the factor to take into consideration of how long each of these chapters were, primarily regarding the main narrative of each of these DLC chapters, which did range from at least an hour long to an hour and a half in terms of pure length for the overall main story of that pack. But with the added features of side missions, collectibles, new suits to unlock, and more, the overall content length for each separate DLC chapter did at least range from at least 3 hours to 4 hours, meaning that if you combine each chapter together, you would have a total amount of at least 9 to 12 hours worth of extra content. And while I do thoroughly appreciate more content being added to Spider-Man PS4 to expand the base game, especially if you have seen my reviews for each separate pack, that doesn't mean that I don't think that there are some flaws with The City That Never Sleeps. Mainly relating to what I believe to be the worst chapter of the overall City That Never Sleeps pack is obviously the second one of Turf Wars.
Good evening, New York. Welcome to tonight's entertainment, the changing of the guard. Tonight, the good old days are coming back.
So yes, while Turf Wars may have had the best DLC suits out of the entirety of the City That Never Sleeps pack, there are some moments during the story of Turf Wars that I think could have been done a lot better, mainly in regards to Hammerhead as a character himself. Having Hammerhead try to obtain the remainder of Silver Sable's tech throughout New York City is obviously a great way to have his Magia crime family expand in ways he could never have imagined beforehand. And while the beginning of Turf Wars does a really great job of setting up Hammerhead's character and the threat that he could possibly become, we only get to see him during the beginning and end of the overall entirety of Turf Wars' main story. Even though the Magia crime family itself does appear to be a major threat for Spider-Man, Yuri, and the overall inhabitants of New York City, I think it would have been better if we did get more of a focus to Hammerhead's character and who he is within Spider-Man PS4's universe. And once we reach the conclusion of Turf Wars, we do get to fight Hammerhead again, but this time with him donning the Project Olympus exosuit that the Sable Tech has been trying to develop. And while this is a very interesting way to try and modernize the Hammerhead character that we all know from the comics, especially since we did see him in a similar exosuit from an older issue of Spider-Man lore, I think it would have been better if we got a more traditional Hammerhead boss fight during the middle of the DLC, then fight him again in the exosuit by the end of this chapter. And a good opportunity I could have seen where Insomniac could allow the player to fight Hammerhead without the exosuit on is during the scene in the beginning where Spider-Man actually ambushes Hammerhead where Yuri is being held captive. That way, knowing the stakes would have been higher that if you lost that fight, Yuri and the other cops would have been killed. Also, fighting Hammerhead without any exosuit on would be much more appropriate given how he has been portrayed in past Spider-Man games, and actually see what type of a threat this version of Hammerhead truly is. That way, by the end when he does equip the exosuit, it shows that he truly can't beat Spider-Man without any added power. And while I am aware that they tried to fit that in within an hour-long DLC story, I think they could have highlighted it a bit better during that main narrative. Or instead, to follow the main narrative of the chapter of it literally being a turf war, they could have easily replaced this version of Hammerhead with the Insomniac version of Silvermane. Not only was Silvermane referenced in the base game of Spider-Man PS4 when you are exploring the Fisk bases, but I do think it would be a better connection since he does have a relationship with Silver Sable in the comics. Or better yet, one idea that I've been thinking about constantly ever since Insomniac released it in the base game is actually them expanding on their version of a very intriguing character that was discovered throughout a collectible backpack in the main game.
With this vial of the lizard's blood, I was able to mix up a cure and turn him back into Dr. Connors. Too bad it didn't last.
Hell no.
That's right, I am indeed talking about none other than Curt Connors himself, aka the Lizard. And while I am aware of the challenges Insomniac would have to face to try and connect Curt Connors' story with Black Cat and Silver Sable's narrative in the DLC already, I still think it would have been a really cool thing to have Lizard as a DLC character to fight within the city that never sleeps. And seeing how Insomniac were already preparing to have the player explore the New York sewers and subway systems like we see in Silver Lining, I do think that would have been a much better setting for the Lizard rather than Silver Sable. However, I can only hope that given his reference within Spider-Man PS4 itself that he might possibly appear within some role within the sequel. But don't worry, it's not all pure negativity for Turf Wars in general because there are some really good aspects of the pack overall. Firstly, one of the main highlights of Turf Wars itself is the inclusion of new bases that do hold a variety of enemy types as well as new environments to go and explore in. So while you do have to fight standard Magia crime family members, you do also have to fight enemies that are equipped with Silver Sable tech like the Jetpack Thugs as well as the Minigunners. And while some people do find these enemies to be frustrating to deal with, they do encourage you to try and mix up your combat techniques by using either environmental takedowns, gadgets, or suit powers. And while I do like the bases that are in the main game, I am much more of a fan of the DLC bases because they do offer much more of a challenge for the player to go and experience. As for the second and last main highlight of Turf Wars is relating to its story, primarily focusing on one of the side characters rather than the main antagonist, which of course relates to Yuri Watanabe. So while the Heist and Silver Lining focus on the main character of that pack like Black Cat and Silver Sable, Turf Wars does something different and focuses on one of Spider-Man's closest allies as the main character. With everything that we know about Yuri within the main game story, it's really interesting to see her descend down this dark path given her history with this version of Hammerhead. Especially given that Hammerhead just came back in town to try and rule over New York with the help of the Magia crime family, Yuri has a history with not only him but the family itself. And seeing how ruthless Hammerhead was to Yuri's men, it truly shows how impactful that was to her and how much of a shift that made for her character. And while I did give Turf Wars a solid 8 out of 10, I still think they could have done something a bit different with the story of the pack itself, or maybe include some other character rather than this version of Hammerhead. But while I genuinely believe Turf Wars to be the worst piece of the Spider-Man PS4 DLC, we are now moving on to what I believe to be the second best of the DLC, which of course relates to the Heist.
Hey there, Spider. Long time no see. Miss me?
Felicia.
Catch me if you can.
So since the Heist was indeed the first chapter of Spider-Man PS4's DLC, I do think Insomniac and Marvel did a great job of giving us an extra expansion to Spider-Man PS4's main universe with the inclusion of Black Cat as the main character of the Heist. Since we did get those Black Cat photo op missions in the base game, as well as a new suit to go along with it, actually having a story purpose as well, there was a lot of high expectations for where Black Cat's story could go within the Heist. And knowing that the entirety of this chapter's main focus is to give more depth to Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy's characters as both Spider-Man and Black Cat from the past and present, I do think it does a great job of delivering on that front. And this is majorly highlighted by the wonderful performances that Yuri Lowenthal and Erica Lindbeck had as Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy. Like I said in my review for the Heist itself, I do think that Yuri Lowenthal and Laura Bailey had a really great relationship and chemistry as Peter Parker and MJ in the main game, but throughout the Heist you can obviously tell that Erica Lindbeck is having a wonderful time flirting with Peter Parker within the main main story. We also get to know about this version of Black Cat even more by experiencing some side missions featuring Felicia Hardy's father, Walter Hardy, and having Spider-Man basically be his lapdog without him knowing it. Again, this not only fleshes out the characters in Spider-Man PS4's universe in general, but it also fully fleshes out Felicia Hardy's character as a person, and more so as the Black Cat persona that we all know and love. And in order for Insomniac and Marvel to solidify the relationship that Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy have with each other even more, they did have a really interesting feature by the end of the heist where you could have a team up between Spider-Man and Black Cat. And while I am slightly disappointed that we couldn't fully control Felicia Hardy during that last part of the DLC, I do think it was really cool to have her team up with Spider-Man and execute stealth takedowns side by side. Although the main downside of this mechanic is, like I already said, is that it was only featured by the end of the heist story, where in reality we would have appreciated this much more throughout the entirety of the heist in general. So overall, the heist did a really good job of setting up the DLC's main storyline, including characters like Black Cat, teasing the main antagonist of Turf Wars with Hammerhead, and also teasing Silver Sable with her equipment scattered throughout New York City. Plus, with the added content of including new collectibles that do add more depth to Spider-Man PS4's universe, as well as new challenges to partake in, I do think that there was a lot of variety, starting off with the heist and expanding within Turf Wars and so on. And while I do think the overall gameplay additions were better within Turf Wars compared to the heist, the main reason why I gave it a 9 out of 10 is purely because of the story relationship between Yuri Lowenthal and Erica Lindbeck as Spider-Man and Black Cat, which finally leads us without a doubt the most definitive and best chapter throughout Marvel's Spider-Man The City That Never Sleeps pack, which is of course the last one of Silver Lining.
I thought you were a good guy!
You have allowed this hammerhead to steal all of my weapons and supplies!
So to basically sum it up, Silver Lining is the massive amalgamation of all the previous DLC chapters leading up to one epic finale. Silver Lining not only fully concludes the Silver Sable arc that was found throughout the entirety of the base game, played wonderfully by Nicole Leese, but it also features a plethora of new gameplay mechanics and side stories as well. This not only includes the most challenging bases throughout the entirety of the game, but also the toughest enemies yet, with all of them being equipped with Silver Sable gear. As for environments, Silver Lining also adds the exploration to go within the New York City sewer system, as well as abandoned subway lines. These aren't just really exciting environments to look into, but also make New York feel completely fleshed out by the time you explore each and every one of them. As for the story of Silver Lining itself, it really does wrap up every narrative that was included within the main game, as well as what the other DLC chapters set up in the first place. This mainly features a really nice heartfelt conclusion between Felicia Hardy and Peter Parker, as well as a mutual agreement and friendship between Silver Sable and Spider-Man. Not to mention a very kind-hearted side story between Spider-Man and David Obademi, who is one of the Sable agents that you can find throughout the entirety of Silver Lining's story. As for the specific story beats that do lead into and hint towards the story of the inevitable sequel, there are actually quite a few, mainly relating to Miles Morales, Yuri Watanabe, and Mary Jane. So of course, throughout all 3 DLC chapters, we do see a really interesting growth in relationship between Peter Parker and Miles Morales, who do share really interesting conversations between phone calls, having Peter try and teach Miles how to be Spider-Man. And while these phone call conversations are very entertaining, it finally pays off in Silver Lining, where we do see Miles becoming Spider-Man, where Peter is fully going to teach him how to become the hero that he can be. And given what a great relationship Peter and Miles have with each other within this game's universe, I have no doubt that they're going to fully expand that within Spider-Man PS4 sequel, with Miles and Peter both becoming and being Spider-Man. As for another character that gets some kind of a conclusion is Yuri Watanabe, who was left off the force after the events of Turf Wars and has started to become a vigilante known as the Wraith. So while the phone calls do provide an extra amount of relationship growth between Peter and Miles within Spider-Man PS4's universe, the same thing is done with Yuri Watanabe and some audio files that can be found throughout Silver Lining relating to her origin as the Wraith. Especially since Yuri directly calls Spider-Man by the end of her story arc, it really shows that she might be a threat during the sequel of the game. And knowing how much Hammerhead put Yuri through, I do understand why she is going down this dark path, although I do have to say I really hope they fully expand on why she's doing this by the time the sequel releases. This will not only give much more depth to Spider-Man and Yuri's relationship with each other, but it would also fully justify the actions that Yuri is doing as the Wraith. But as for the story point that I find the most intriguing throughout Silver Linings DLC is the fact that MJ is actually flying off to Symkaria to try and cover everything that's happening over in that country. This not only means that through MJ's absence that Insomniac and Marvel are truly going to focus on the relationship that Peter and Miles have with each other, but it will also show that since MJ is in fact in Symkaria, they may in fact introduce another love interest that Spider-Man may have in the sequel, primarily with Gwen Stacy. And if you don't know why I'm saying Gwen in the first place, is because Insomniac did did tease back in 2018 that there is a possibility that Gwen might be alive within the PS4 universe. And while we don't know if this version of Gwen Stacy, if to be included in the sequel, will fall in love with Peter or Miles, I still think her inclusion in the sequel will be really interesting to see be played out. So in the end, I do believe that Silver Lining is truly the best chapter of the City That Never Sleeps pack of Spider-Man PS4's DLC, and with that in mind, I do think that Insomniac overall had a really great amount of DLC to give for Spider-Man PS4 in general. Alongside of the City That Never Sleeps fleshing out some characters that were really intriguing within the Spider-Man PS4 universe, I do think it adds some really interesting gameplay mechanics and gameplay features that the base game didn't have. Plus, everything that Silver Lining managed to accomplish within the small time frame that they had within an hour to hour and a half long story, I do think that all this sets up the sequel quite nicely. However, the biggest problem that I have throughout all the DLCs, which is why they don't get a 10 out of 10 from me, is obviously the inclusion of Screwball instead of another hero or villain that Spider-Man could go up against. And it sucks because I do like the challenges that Screwball has, it's just that Screwball herself is a very annoying character that all the players would much rather have be replaced instead of her being in the DLC. For example, Insomniac could have easily replaced Screwball with Taskmaster instead and have the exact amount of effect, and people would actually like it more to get more of this really interesting character. But the only reason why I can think Insomniac and Marvel would want to include Screwball in the DLC on purpose is because they know how irritating she is and would make players feel satisfied actually taking her out after every single piece of DLC is completed. And while that reason does make sense, I still would have honestly preferred Taskmaster instead. Which is why, if you know already, my ratings for each of the DLC packs is the Heist is a solid 9 out of 10, Turf Wars is a solid 8 out of 10, and Silver Lining is again a solid 9 out of 10. And if you haven't personally purchased the DLC for Spider-Man PS4 yourself, I would actually highly recommend that you do so, because I do think it is a very fun and interesting time. Plus, if you're eagerly awaiting for the sequel to release like I am, this will be a great way to have the expansion of Spider-Man PS4 continue without you feeling left out. And if this was all the DLC that we received for Spider-Man PS4, I can't wait to see what type of DLC that's going to be in the sequel. And with all that said, everyone, that's the video that I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What was your personal favorite and least favorite DLC pack out of the City That Never Sleeps, and do you think the DLC was actually worth the buy? In my personal opinion, I think Insomniac put just as much effort in the DLC just like they did in the main game, and it truly shows throughout the high quality cutscenes and really interesting gameplay features. But still, let me know all your thoughts about that subject, because I would really love to know what you guys think. And with all that in mind, it's time to give you an awesome update to the Spidey Squad photo mode competition that is still going on within our community. So if you somehow missed it, the Spidey Squad is holding a weekly photo mode competition where you can participate and have your photo possibly be shown off in these videos and our social media pages. And for our last week's subject, it was the Iron Spider suit from Infinity War with the inclusion of the Iron Spider suit power arms in the photo. So huge congrats to week 3's winners with these amazing shots of the Iron Spider suit in action with the Iron Spider arms attached. And this mainly goes to at Jimenez Miles, as well as at the _ice_spider, and of course at Marakachi, and finally ending it with at Duggery Skull. So huge congrats to all these winners for these incredibly talented shots within Spider-Man PS4's photo mode. And if you want to join in on the photo mode fun, this week's competition is relating to the Into the Spider-Verse suit, where we do encourage you to take some really interesting shots with that suit equipped. So make sure to go out there and get us some pictures of Spider-Man ASAP. And until the next video, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Peace out.
And you know what? Go pick it up right now, because that's what I'm doing.